For decades, the United States stood as the unchallenged superpower of the modern world. From the end of the Second World War through the Cold War and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, America was seen as the architect and guarantor of the global order. Its military might was unmatched, its economy the largest and most dynamic, and its political values of democracy and freedom gave it enormous soft power. Yet under Donald Trump, the picture of America as the leader of the free world appeared to change dramatically. Some of these changes were the result of deliberate policy decisions, others the result of circumstances such as the COVID-19 pandemic, and still others a reflection of deep structural challenges that had been building for years. But whatever the causes, the perception both at home and abroad was that America was no longer the steady and reliable superpower it once was. Trump's political philosophy was captured in the slogan, "America First." To his supporters, this meant protecting American workers, prioritizing domestic industry, and refusing to be exploited by foreign countries. To his critics, it meant isolation, short-termism, and the abandonment of America's historic role as a global leader. The effects of this approach could be seen in nearly every sphere of American life and global influence. The world watched with surprise, sometimes admiration, sometimes shock, as the United States under Trump seemed to break away from the very system it had built and defended for decades. The international stage offered the first signs of decline. America withdrew from the Paris Climate Accord, the most ambitious international effort to combat global warming. This was not just a policy disagreement but a symbolic withdrawal from global leadership on one of the defining issues of the century. For European allies who had looked to Washington for guidance, this decision was a clear signal that the US no longer wished to lead collective action. Similarly, abandoning the Iran nuclear deal sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. Years of painstaking negotiation had created an agreement that was fragile but functional. America's withdrawal angered European allies, emboldened Iran, and weakened trust in Washington's ability to commit to long-term agreements. For many around the world, this was a turning point. America was not only stepping back from leadership but also undermining its own credibility. NATO, the backbone of Western security for over 70 years, also came under strain. Trump publicly criticized allies for failing to meet defense spending targets, calling NATO obsolete, and suggesting that the US might not defend members who failed to pay their fair share. While pressure to increase defense spending was not new, the confrontational style was. Allies who had once assumed American support was unconditional began to wonder if Washington might actually walk away. For small countries on Russia's border, this uncertainty was alarming. America's role as the ultimate security guarantor seemed less assured. At the same time, Trump sought unprecedented engagement with adversaries. His summits with North Korea's Kim Jong-un were historic, breaking decades of hostility. While these meetings captured global attention, they produced little concrete progress. Critics argued that they gave legitimacy to a dictator without achieving disarmament. Trump's positive remarks about leaders like Vladimir Putin also confused the traditional narrative of America as a champion of democracy and human rights. Instead of standing against authoritarianism, the United States appeared to admire and even emulate aspects of it. Relations with China defined much of Trump's foreign policy. The trade war was his most significant confrontation. By imposing tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese goods, Trump sought to reduce the trade deficit and punish Beijing for unfair practices. While this stance resonated with many Americans who believed China had taken advantage of the US, the global effects were disruptive. Supply chains suffered, farmers faced retaliatory tariffs, and markets became uncertain. Meanwhile, China deepened ties with other countries through its Belt and Road Initiative, presenting itself as a stable alternative to an unpredictable America. The trade war highlighted the shift from cooperation to competition, but it also exposed vulnerabilities in America's economic system. Soft power, long a cornerstone of U.S. influence, also declined. America's universities, culture, and ideals had traditionally attracted admiration and loyalty. Yet under Trump, immigration restrictions, travel bans on Muslim-majority countries, and harsh rhetoric against migrants projected an image of exclusion. For many outside observers, America looked less like the land of opportunity and more like a fortress closing its gates. Surveys conducted by Pew Research showed trust in U.S. leadership plummeting in many countries, reaching record lows. Where once America was admired, it was now met with skepticism, even hostility. Inside the United States, the situation was equally challenging. Trump's presidency exposed deep divisions in American society. His supporters saw him as a champion of forgotten workers, someone willing to speak bluntly and fight the political establishment. His opponents viewed him as divisive and dangerous, undermining democratic institutions and social cohesion. The country became polarized to an extent unseen in modern times. Political debates turned into battles, and compromise seemed impossible. Economic performance in the early years of Trump's term looked strong. Unemployment fell to historic lows, stock markets rose, and GDP grew steadily. His tax cuts and deregulation pleased businesses and investors. Yet these gains were unevenly distributed, with inequality continuing to rise. Moreover, the national debt ballooned as government revenues fell and spending increased. The economic boom, it turned out, was built on fragile foundations. When the COVID-19 pandemic struck, those foundations collapsed. America entered a severe recession, unemployment soared, and millions lost their jobs. The healthcare system, already strained, buckled under the pressure. Political battles over masks, lockdowns, and vaccines further divided the population. What should have been a moment of national unity became another arena of conflict. To the outside world, the United States looked chaotic and unprepared. For the first time in generations, other countries no longer saw America as the model of crisis management. Instead, they saw a nation struggling to protect its own citizens. The interior divisions spilled into the streets. Protests erupted across the country, from women's marches to demonstrations against racial injustice. The killing of George Floyd in 2020 sparked massive protests demanding change. The government's response was often heavy-handed, with images of federal forces clashing with demonstrators broadcast worldwide. These scenes contradicted America's traditional message of freedom and human rights, further eroding its moral authority. Even in terms of safety, Trump's policies were double-edged. He invested heavily in the military, increasing defense spending and pursuing modernization. His administration celebrated the destruction of the ISIS caliphate and the killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani as proof of America's strength. Yet the broader picture was less reassuring. By reducing reliance on allies and emphasizing unilateral action, America appeared isolated. The long-term security provided by strong partnerships was undermined. Safety at home may have been prioritized, but the safety of America's global position was weakened. Trump's unique selling point, both domestically and abroad, was his willingness to break norms. He rejected the cautious diplomacy of previous presidents, choosing instead blunt language and bold gestures. To his supporters, this was refreshing and necessary. He was not afraid to challenge China, confront NATO allies, or strike deals on new terms. To his critics, this approach sacrificed long-term leadership for short-term headlines. America's uniqueness had shifted from being the architect of global order to being the unpredictable disruptor. The price of these policies was significant. Economically, the trade wars cost billions. Politically, America's credibility suffered. Allies questioned Washington's commitments, adversaries tested boundaries, and international institutions adapted to a world where U.S. leadership was no longer guaranteed. The cost at home was also high. Division, mistrust, and polarization eroded the sense of national unity that is essential for global power. For decades, the United States had been the indispensable nation, the one country others turned to in times of crisis. Under Trump, that reputation weakened. Whether it was climate change, global health, or collective security, America was often absent or actively opposed. The image of decline was not just about raw power but about perception. A superpower must be seen as reliable, trustworthy, and principled. Under Trump, America was often seen as erratic, self-serving, and divided. The question remains whether this decline was temporary or permanent. Some argue that Trump merely revealed weaknesses that had been building for years: economic inequality, political polarization, and overextension abroad. From this perspective, the decline was inevitable, with or without Trump. Others argue that Trump accelerated the decline by abandoning leadership roles and undermining alliances. Whatever the case, the world during his presidency saw a United States that looked less like the confident superpower of old and more like a nation struggling to find its place.